It is Tuesday, June 23rd. This is the Christian Commute. I'm your host, Seth Dunn. This is a Calhoun show because I went to Panda Express for lunch, and I'm just going to head on home and finish my work day from the home office. So all that time it takes to get from Dalton to Calhoun on the show, ain't going to have it. So what can I cut? I'll just cut the usual spiel of whycrosspoint.com because I don't have anything to say except what I said last week. Matt Chandler and Josh Howerton trying to tell people how to be men. Blah. Whycrosspoint.com, whynorthpoint.org, whyelevation.com, whyrockbridge.com. Don't forget to support the Why Project, informing people about all the problems with seeker-sensitive Ayatollah of rock and roll goat churches in the Purple Haze, pastored by Electric Blue and sponsored by the specially treated high-capacity givers. I do not have a full show for you today. The inbox is still empty. If you have a question, if anybody still listens, if you have a question about Christian theology or apologetics, you can write to Seth Dunn88 at gmail.com. Seth Dunn88 at gmail.com. Or you can dial 470-315-0875. The Christian Commute is your theological roadside assistance. Today's show topic is the ditches of dispensationalism and postmillennialism. Dispensationalism and post-millennialism. We've got to stay in between those ditches. And if we're going to fall in one, oh Lord, let's not fall. Don't let us fall, Lord, into the Postmil ditch. We'll get to that after the Bible chapter review and after corrections. As you guys know, I listen to every Christian Commute episode after I record it, not because I want to hear the sound of my own voice, but because I want to make sure I didn't say anything wrong. So I have some corrections from previous shows. One, in a previous show, I said that Mystique from Marvel Comics was a shape-shifting alien. She's not an alien. She's a mutant. She's from planet Earth. Her name is Raven Darkholme, and she's Nightcrawler's mom. So there you go. That's Mystique is not an alien. So I'm sure somebody was listening to that. He's like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The second thing I want to correct is on my Ogden History X show, I was talking about them being their gas station church out there. And I was under the impression, the false impression, that they founded that church themselves in Utah. That's not what happened. And this makes a lot of sense when you know about Salve's background, Suve, Rico Suave, whatever his name is, Salve. That church has been rebranded. It was originally a Calvary Chapel. It was the Calvary Chapel Ogden. Okay? And for some reason, I didn't research it, there was a problem with the guy who was the pastor, and they had to get rid of him. And he was replaced by Brian Salve. Now this is where the rebranding comes in. I talked about the Duck Dynasty stuff. If you look up an old picture of Salve, you can see he's clean shaven, and he's not doing his 1920s black and white tie you to the train tracks movie villain shtick. He's not in his Duck Dynasty beard, and he came out. His education, he came out of Calvary Chapel, like one of their Bible colleges. And so, of course, he went there because that was his background. But then, I guess over time, they decided to rebrand themselves away from Calvary Chapel and into a quote-unquote Reformed church that's Paedo-Baptist, that's Presbyterian except for the presbytery. And they're their own thing. So Jordan Hall, who I'm going to mention later in this podcast, he used to talk about people who traded doctrine like Pokemon cards. And if you look at the timeline of Refuge Church in Ogden becoming the Manly Beard Church from the Calvary Chapel. It's along the timeline when people wanted to be young, restless, and reformed, and they had the Reformed Pub on Facebook, and they had the beards and cigars. And Jordan, on his podcast, on the original Pulpit and Pen podcast, would always talk about these people who trade their doctrine like Pokemon cards. Like they were one thing and then they're the other thing. So you have Suve, who was a clean-shaven Calvary Chapel dude, and now he's a Paedo-Baptist Reformed Man Church guy. Like, well, which is it? You know, whatever's popular at the time, I guess. And that falls in to the point of that show of what I was talking about, is this is how you can tell, guys. But I wanted to make that correction. So there's a correction there. I should have done more research. It's one of those things like, how hard do I have to research these guys who had a Nazi vendor at their thing? Like, they're just bad. We were going to have a 60-minute debate about this. Opening statement, they had a Nazi at their thing. I rest my case. All right, now let's move on to Luke chapter 13, verses 18 through 21. Jesus is preaching here. So he was saying, what is the kingdom of God like? Excuse me. What is the kingdom of God like? And to what shall I compare it? It is like a mustard seed which a man took and threw into his own garden, and it grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air nested in its branches. Now, the people who did the translation for the New American Standard Bible, they're going to take you back to Ezekiel chapter 23 right there, because they think Jesus is alluding to Ezekiel chapter, is that a 17 or a 23? Because I wrote down 23, but I think it's 17. This is the great professional production value on the Christian community. How about just Ezekiel? And again he said, to what shall I compare the kingdom of God? It is like leaven which a woman took and hid in the pecks of flour until it was leavened. And now I'm stuck, oh my gosh. On the way here, I can't make this up. On the way here, I got stuck behind an oversized load. 2 oversized load trucks with giant industrial silos and a state trooper escort. And I wasn't late to work, because you know what, I really can't be late to work. I'm not punching a clock. And I got there before 9. Nobody tells me when to get there and when to leave. I just get my work done. But I was later than I wanted to be, because I was stuck in traffic behind that. And now on the way home, I only go to work 2 days a week. I get stuck behind another oversized load. This looks like a double-wide trailer. I don't know, is the kingdom of heaven like a double-wide trailer taking up the whole road? No. Okay. What's Jesus talking about here? So a mustard seed is a very, very, very small seed. Christians know that, because mustard seeds are in the Bible, but I bet people who didn't grow up in church don't know that mustard seeds are really small. But we know, because we've heard about mustard seeds from Jesus in the Bible. And Jesus gives the example of somebody planting this tiny seed, but over time it grows into a huge tree. And the tree's so big and expansive that it can support birds. Now birds can come and rest in its branches. As a mustard seed, that's too small for a bird to even notice to eat. But now it's grown into something so large that the birds can rest in its branches. And if you go to Ezekiel, there's a prophecy that involves a cedar tree, and God taking a piece of a cedar tree and then planting it and making a big tree out of that little sprig. And if you read that, it talks about God can make like dry things grow. Basically, if something is unhealthy and little, he can make it healthy and strong. Talking about trees and forests, stuff like that, and plants. But if something is healthy and strong, he can take and make it, dry and brittle. So you can go reference that if you will. So think about that in the immediate context and what preceded this. is the synagogue officials are condemning Jesus for healing on the Sabbath, but he humiliates them. Those are the people, in their mind, they think we're the kingdom of God, right? Because they're running the synagogue. They're the religious authorities. So in their mind, they're like, we're where it's at. We're the kingdom of God. But the inbreaking of the kingdom of God comes with Jesus. He's the Messiah. They're rejecting him. They're not accepting him. And he's saying here, the kingdom of God is not something that happens like right away. The kingdom of God is not like an A-bomb or a cannon or something big like that. It's like this little tiny mustard seed where you wouldn't expect anything of it by looking at it, but given enough time for it to grow and expand and to become something mighty. And it's the same idea with the flour. It doesn't take a lot of leaven. In fact, that's a saying elsewhere in the Bible. If it's a negative connotation saying, a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Well, Jesus talks about 3 pecks of flour. That's a lot of flour. Okay, you can make a lot of bread with that. And it just takes a little bit of leaven to make that flour expand. So leaven, when you're baking bread out of flour, is what makes the bread expand. Otherwise, you'd have what? Unleavened bread. Okay? And it just takes a little bit. So Jesus is saying, the kingdom of heaven is like this. It just takes a little bit to grow. And to get in something. In this case, to get in the flour and make it grow big when you're breaking the bread. So here comes Jesus. He comes humbly. He comes not in the way that many of them would expect their Messiah to come. And I'm not just talking about being, born in the stable and placed in the manger. I'm not just talking about that. But he's not riding in trying to fight the Romans. I mean, the difficulty Jesus has is with these religious authorities of his day who, for the most part, just don't care about people. And Jesus does. And you look by now, well, they crucified him, but he resurrected. We know this on the other end, at the end of the book. And now the kingdom of heaven the kingdom of God's everywhere. Right? There's Christianity everywhere, and it's not done growing. And one day Jesus is going to return, and with that we'll end the Bible chapter review. Now let's talk about 2 ditches. That being premillennialism and postmillennialism. And if you guys have been listening to this show long enough, you've heard me say that you might have, even within your own local church, people who disagree about the millennium, whether they be pre-mill, post-mill, or a-mill. And in fact, I am going to have coffee later today at about 6 o'clock with a friend of mine from my church. And he is an A-mill guy, and I'm not. And it causes absolutely zero issues at our local church that he's A-mill and I'm pre-mill. I think the pastor's pre-mill. And, the other guys, I don't even know if I've even talked to him about it. It's a lot of his, who cares, this hasn't happened yet. I mean, it's important because it's in the Bible, but we all agree Jesus is coming back. And people tend to think, they're the 3 non-heretical positions or non-problematic positions are pre-mill, post-mill, and a-mill. But certainly not full preterism. I guess you could throw partial preterism in there as a non-heretical thing that people accept, even though it's rarer where I'm from. But we can't have full preterism, can't have that. And I've always been one to say we cannot have post-millennialism. That is an eschatology that will tear up your local church because people will turn your church into an instrument of taking dominion. You can't just sit with it. Now, somebody's like, you're just not supposed to sit around, you're supposed to fulfill the Great Commission. But post-mill is going to do something to your church and the mission and its people. All right? So that's a ditch you want to stay out of. And way over under the other side, I'm not just going to say dispensationalism. I will say like Zionist, maybe dual covenant dispensationalism, where you think it is the job of the church to do the bidding of Israel. And I'll give you an example that was really a disturbing example when I heard it, and you guys can Google this to make sure I'm saying it right. It's Mike Huckabee, who's the U.S. ambassador to Israel, who used to be a Baptist preacher. He said something along the lines of America owes its existence to Israel. There's no America without Israel, which is absurd. But there are people out there who believe, I'm not making this up, there's people out there, I don't make this stuff up, there's people out there who believe that America is successful and is blessed by God because it's a protector of Israel. And here's another thing for you to Google. There's a video about the blood moons when John Hagee wrote Blood Moons, and they got some talking head TV preachers together to talk about the blood moons. And John Hagee was there, and they brought in Hugh Ross. And I've told this story before, and it's hard for me to tell it without laughing. And Hugh Ross is an apologist, but he's also an astronomer. Like that was his job before he became an apologist. I think Reasons to Believe is his outfit. Like he looking at stars and moons and suns and the sun. That's his job, an astronomer. And they were talking, and he said to John Hagee, he's like, you know, they can't even see the blood moons from Israel. And John Hagee, like, you know, he's reading this book, he stopped dead, he's like, what? And Hugh Ross is like, yeah, you know, the moon looks red from here about these times, but in that part of the world, they can't see it, they don't see that. And John Hagee goes, oh, I didn't know that. And the little MC host guy, he tries to like throw Hagee a bone that we see it in America. It's like, do you think that's because of America's role as protector of Israel? Where does it say that in the Bible? Nowhere. Because that's not America's role. And it's disturbing that the U.S. ambassador is of that mind. And there's a lot of people of that mind who were dispensationalists, and they believe, like some of them at least, believe the Jews are saved some way differently than the rest of us. And as I've said before, and if you're local to here, you know that's a very popular eschatology here. And then once I got seminary learning, and I started just really thinking hard about all the things I'd been taught growing up in church, everything stuck except one. And I was like, the church is Israel. And you guys know that's what I believe, and that's what I think. And you guys also know I'm not an expert on eschatology. I'm premillennial, but I'm like, what is that song? I know I watch CNN, but I can't tell you the difference between Iraq and Iran. I mean, you're just ignorant, Alan Jackson. Come on, one's Arab and one's Persian. We ought to be able to know the difference. And, well, I'm not watching CNN. But anyway, I'm like that with eschatology. Like, I know Jesus is coming back, and I know there's a 1,000-year reign, and I know it's not figurative, but don't ask me much more, okay? Not my area of expertise, but I know dispensationalism is bad and premillennialism is wrong. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because none other than Pulpit and Pen founder Jordan Hall went on the Tucker Carlson program. I think it debuted yesterday. So he had an hour with Tucker Carlson. Oh, no, an hour and a half almost. Maybe more than that. And what he was doing is he was talking about Zionism. And I don't, by the way, I don't really keep up with Tucker Carlson. He seems like kind of a fringe guy to me nowadays. But Jordan was on there talking about Zionism. And Tucker Carlson shared it and says, all right, I'm with theologian J.D. Hall. Now, let me stop right there and say I was really disappointed in some of the reaction I saw on social media to J.D. being called a theologian. Because J.D. went to Bible college. He went to Williams Baptist College, which is an Arkansas Baptist Convention state Baptist college down there. It's a private school. It's not a secular school is what I mean. It's a Bible college that the Baptists have. And You can major in anything you want when you go to Bible college, but basically everybody who goes to a Southern Baptist Bible college has a minor in Bible. I mean, like, you take Bible classes. That's why you go to Bible college. Okay? And after that, he went and got a master's. I think his master's is from Arkansas State, and it's in history. JD really likes history, and he has a master's in it, and he's very knowledgeable about history, especially U.S. history. Okay? That has nothing to do with being a theologian, but that's just something. Now, here you have a guy who went to Bible college, and then he spent the next 20 years of his life as a vocational pastor. Sometimes bivocational, sometimes vocational. But he spent the next 20 years of his life as a pastor, and you're going to tell me that guy's not a theologian? You're going to tell me that guy's not studying the Greek and systematic theologies to oversee his church? Give me a break. No, JD is not a seminary professor. He's not a PhD, but I think it's incredibly fair, and not just in the sense that all Christians are theologians, but it's incredibly fair to say he's a theologian. And I'm going to tell you this, it doesn't matter what he did, that doesn't undo him being a theologian, all right? We're going to think about it this way. Wayne Grudem is a theologian. Nobody's going to argue that. He might be a good one or a bad one. People might argue that. But Wayne Grudem's systematic theology textbook is a very popular textbook in evangelical seminaries. Nobody's going to say that Wayne Grudem is not a theologian. Well, let's say tomorrow they catch Wayne Grudem at a house of prostitution and find out he was cheating on his taxes, and he's disqualified from ministry or pastoral ministry. That's another thing I want to say. You can never be disqualified from ministry. You can only be disqualified from, say, pastoral ministry or the diaconate, okay? You can be disqualified from offices of ministry. But just because if you're a Christian and you do, I'm not going to say make a mistake, if you sin horribly, you can be forgiven and you still have to carry out the Great Commission. But let's just say Wayne Grudem was disqualified from ministry and fired from whatever religious institution he works for, and nobody ever wants to use his book again because there's a black cloud over it. It doesn't mean he's not a theologian. So people are jumping all over Twitter and say, oh, this is the same Jordan Hall who had a drug addiction, and this is the same Jordan Hall who he got arrested for embezzlement and he committed spousal abuse. Like, all right, first of all, I've spoken to his wife, okay? I have spoken to the man's wife who is still married to him, okay? This whole spousal abuse thing that people take and run with, you shouldn't be taking and running with it, okay? I've talked to the guy's wife. Listen, Mandy Hall's a tough girl, okay? I'm going to tell you that. I don't think anybody's going to mess with you. She's not, let's say it this way. She's not the type of girl who people think of when they think of these ultra-masculine, misogynistic people and like IFB preacher types. You can just beat her and she'll take it. I'm going to tell you, that ain't her. She's not some wallflower. So people get this idea in their head that JD is this big guy and he was beating his wife. It's just simply not true. It's just simply not their history, their relationship, and I don't think it's a potentiality, because that's just not the kind of woman she is. But anyway, all that to say is, not only is that not the truth, even if it was true, it wouldn't make him not a theologian. And the embezzlement thing, he'd never go to jail for embezzlement. That's another misunderstanding. But even if it was true, it wouldn't mean he's not a theologian. And yeah, it is true that he was hooked on Xanax, but guess what? Still a theologian. Sinning and becoming permanently disqualified from the pastoral office, and you guys know how I feel about the permanence thing, which is the same opinion Jordan has, doesn't mean that he's not a theologian anymore. It doesn't mean that all his study and history is wrong. And I would commend the first part of that interview to anybody who is under the misimpression that the verse in Genesis where God talks about to Abraham, whoever blesses thee I will bless, whoever curses thee I will curse, is about the nation of Israel, modern day Israel, the secular nation over there founded in 1948, or ethnic Jews for that matter. It ain't about what we call ethnic Jews. It's about the descendants of Abraham, which are Christians, which is us. And Jordan does a great theological job of explaining that on the Tucker Carlson program. Okay? Good job on that. The theology. And he's explaining that coming from a cultural milieu of dispensationalism times a million, okay, in our denomination and where he's from. And people, I've heard that verse misapplied since I was a kid. And it's about time we stopped misapplying it. And one of my favorite video clips ever, kind of like the John Hagee thing, is when Tucker Carlson was interviewing Ted Cruz, and he says, where does it say that in the Bible, talking about I will bless thee? And Ted Cruz didn't even know. It's because it doesn't say it. The thing they think it says something, but it doesn't mean that thing you keep saying. It does not mean what you think it means. Somebody needs to make a Inigo Montoya, Mandy Patinkin meme about that verse from Genesis. The rest of the interview, though, is, I don't want to call it conspiracy theory stuff. But like, it's history. It's history I haven't studied and Jordan has. The history of the Schofield Reference Bible. And then some criticisms about the Israeli Defense Force and their treatment of combatants and non-combatants alike, hostiles, if you will. Like, I don't get into all that. I think the Tucker Carlson audience is into all that. But this is relevant because, you know, I don't know if we're still in a war with Iran, but Israel and the United States were co-belligerents in attacks against Iran. And now the peace process is ongoing, and, you know, there's some disagreements between the United States and Israel on how that should play out. Whatever. But there are a significant number of Christians out there who politically think, American Christians who think that by default, we should be always allies with Israel because of this Bible verse they're misapplying. And really nothing could be further from the truth. We're not theologically bound to be allies politically with Israel because of that verse. That doesn't, but here's what I'm saying. Sometimes we should, sometimes we shouldn't. I don't know. It depends on what the war and the situation is. Probably not a good idea to be allies with Iran and Iraq. Politically speaking, the reason I would be more supportive of Israel than the other nations over there, because Israel's a Western-style democracy and those other nations aren't. But when you get down towards it, I would say, I really don't think we should have much to do with them over there. Unless we need oil, then we need to fight and take oil because we need it to live. But I'd like to stay out of foreign wars. But if you've paid attention to the body of Jordan's work over the last year or two, almost everything is about Israel and the Jews. Like, when I get it in my Substack inbox, and if I see it's something to do with the Jews, I just stop reading it, because I've had enough of him talking about the Jews over and over and over and over, and Schofield, what the Jews are doing, Jewish conspiracies. And that gets me to sort of this other thing in the ditch. Jordan's been writing for NXR, the New Christian Right, and that's Joel Webbin's outfit. And Joel Webbin's base and the Ogden base, because at the end of that interview with Tucker Carlson, he's like, well, you know, check out Joel Webbin and check out the guys in Ogden. Their base is anti-Semitic. That's why there was a Nazi at the Ogden thing. And I've said it before on this program, talking about these premillennial gas station churches like Jeff Durbin postmillennial. They're looking for guys and saying, we're Postmil, we're going to go take dominion. We got something to fight about. And I really think that's why Jeff Durbin and Doug Wilson don't get along with Webben and the Ogden guys. Because Webben and the Ogden guys will just kind of go further down the road. There's a lot of anti-Semitism and Nazi sympathy out there. And that's horrible. And that's who will platform Jordan now. Well, why is it only those guys who will platform Jordan? And that's Jordan's market now. So Jordan will write about whatever somebody will read, all right? Because he's an excellent writer. He's good at research and rhetoric and writing. He's just good at it. And because of his past and of the sins and the disqualification, really, I think the only people who will consume his stuff and want to listen to him are the Joel Webbens of the world. And you take a guy like Jordan, who's always been against Zionism and dispensationalism, and now he's linked up with these guys. But I also remember when he was against theonomy and postmillennialism, postmill theonomy. And now who's he yoked with? Post-mill theonomy guys. You're getting pushed into the other ditch. So this is sort of my warning for you guys out there. It's okay for you to be in your local church and say, I've had it with the dispensationalism and the Zionism. We have an unhealthy political outlook towards Israel, but don't get in the other ditch of anti-Semitism and then Christian nationalistic post-millennialism. Focus on the right theology. And I'll say this, if you watch the first few minutes of that Tucker Carlson YouTube and hear Jordan explain the Old Covenant and the New Covenant and Abraham and being sons according to promise, I don't think anybody can go in there and do a better theological job. But stop right there and don't get into that post-mill ditch with Webben and the Ogden boys. And with that, I'll end the Christian Commute. I didn't even say anything about what an arrogant donkey, another name for a donkey hole, that James White is. Thanks for listening to the Christian Commute. Lord willing, I'll be back with you again tomorrow. As always, God bless. And a-hole is what I meant. As always, God bless. And as always, remember, Christianity is not about getting saved. It's about being saved.